Good morning. I'm Dr. Suzanne Prevost, President of Sigma Theta Tau International, the Honor Society for Nursing, and I would like to welcome you to our third presentation of the International Nurse Researcher Hall of Fame. Before we honor our 2012 nurse researchers, I'd like to recognize any members in the audience who were previously inducted into our Hall of Fame. Are any of our former recipients in the audience? I know we have a few here at the conference, but I don't see. Oh, stand up, please. Congratulations and thank you for being with us. Today, we're honoring 14 distinguished nurse researchers. This distinction honors Sigma Theta Tau International members who have achieved significant and sustained national and/or international recognition for their work. Their research has impacted the profession and the people we serve. All but one of our honorees is here with us today. Dr. Kathleen Stevens, who received the Epstein Award at our November biennial convention, is also an inductee who could not be with us today. So please join me in honoring Dr. Stevens. The presentation of the International Nurse Researcher Hall of Fame is sponsored by Wiley Blackwell. On behalf of Sigma Theta Tau International Board of Directors, I thank Wiley Blackwell for its continued support of this program. They have supported us every year in this program and also have agreed to support us again next year in presenting this program. So many thanks to Wiley Blackwell. And now I'd like to welcome Peter Dongia, who is our Australian representative of Wiley Blackwell.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prevost. Wiley Blackwell is very proud of its close relationship to Sigma Theta Tau and is honoured to be sponsoring the International Nurse Researcher Hall of Fame. We're also very happy that this year's conference is held in Australia, in lovely Brisbane, and lucky that the weather's been so fantastic. Wiley Blackwell publishes over 1,400 journals, with the overwhelming majority being published in partnership with respected organisations such as STTI. We have an excellent portfolio of books and journals in all areas of nursing and a far reach into the global nursing marketplace. We're privileged to provide nurses in all phases of their education and career with leading, high-quality publications, with ever-increasing importance placed on professional development and the advancement of nursing and healthcare science. Our journals and books are the publications of choice for clinicians, researchers, managers, academics and students globally. Wiley Blackwell's relationship with Sigma Theta Tau International spans many years. We proudly publish worldviews on evidence-based nursing and Journal of Nursing Scholarship on behalf of STTI. In Australia, we are also honoured to publish some other major nursing journals and are pleased that we can include our journals alongside publications from organisations with the reputation and intellectual rigour of STTI. And personally, I'm also proud to note that 3 of the inductees today are based in Australia. There's no doubt that the 14 researchers honoured here are at the top of their field and have reached a level which many would aspire to. To be publicly recognised as they are today is a great achievement and one that should not be underestimated. Wiley Blackwell congratulates all the 14 nurse researchers who have been inducted into the International Nurse Researcher Hall of Fame. And thank you very much again for giving Wiley Blackwell the opportunity to be involved in this exciting and important event.
Thank you, Peter, and our thanks again to Wiley Blackwell for their continued support. Now I'd like to invite Sigma Theta Tau International President-elect, Dr. Hester Klopper, to join me on this stage for presentation of the International Nurse Researcher Hall of Fame honorees. I'll introduce each honoree in alphabetical order and invite them to join us on stage. Please hold your applause until all have been introduced. Time doesn't permit me to tell you all the work that these honored people have accomplished, but you can find more details about their work in the Virginia Henderson International Nursing Library. After all honorees have been introduced, we'll take a seat and I'll pose some questions that were submitted in advance by conference attendees. And now it's my privilege to introduce to you the 2012 International Nurse Researcher Hall of Fame honorees. Dr. Geraldine Allen. For the past 25 years, Dr. Geraldine Allen has developed and tested innovative models to advance nursing care for individuals with cardiovascular disease. These models include a program of home-based risk factor modification and nurse case management system for treatment of hyperlipidemia. Her work has helped to improve adherence to United States guidelines in community clinics, reducing cardiovascular risk in underserved urban communities. Dr. Allen promotes nursing science by conducting research, leading interdisciplinary research teams, and mentoring future scientists. Her expertise has been sought for formal consultation on numerous research initiatives internationally. She has influenced the direction of research, practice, and policy. Next, Dr. Patricia Davidson. Dr. Davidson is also globally recognized for her work in cardiovascular disease. Dr. Davidson has concentrated on improving heart failure management, palliative and supportive care, and research to improve women's health. Her significant contributions include research that has improved outcomes of individuals living with life-limiting illnesses. She's also addressed the needs of vulnerable populations, particularly those from culturally and linguistically diverse and indigenous populations. Dr. Davidson's work in these areas has not only advanced the nursing profession and consumer health outcomes, but has also had a significant impact on health policy. Next, Dr. Helen Edwards. Her research is focused on clinical and educational interventions related to aging and chronic disease, in particular self-management, wound healing, quality of life, and family caregiving. Dr. Edwards' research team was the first in Australia to conduct a clinical trial on the effectiveness of a disease self-management model for people with leg ulcers. The medical surgical textbook that she co-edited has been adopted by most of the Australian nursing schools. This text promotes the translation of research to practice, promotes quality in service delivery, and has impacted policy. Dr. Inrhf has committed herself to making a difference in the lives of people living with HIV/AIDS with a specific focus on HIV stigma. Her research has grown in depth to move from a broader understanding to intensive community-based intervention research, touching the lives of many people living with HIV and AIDS. Her research has been translated into practice through training manuals on HIV stigma for researchers and community members. She's provided consultation to the Department of Health in South Africa, producing a significant impact on the quality and value of service delivery. Additionally, Dr. Inrhf and a team of her experts were invited by the World Health Organization to write guidelines for the disclosure of children's HIV status. She's committed to facilitating positive changes in academia and practice. Dr. Deborah Gross. Deborah has made significant and sustained contributions in the areas of early childhood mental health, parenting, and research methods. She created a measure of parenting self-efficacy known as the Toddler Care Questionnaire that's been translated and used internationally by nurse scientists and those from other professions. Dr. Gross led the development of the innovative Chicago Parent Program, which was funded by the U.S. NIH. This was the first evidence-based parenting program developed by and for ethnic minority parents raising young children in poverty. This cost-effective program has resulted in improved behavioral outcomes for parents and children in several trials. It's now used in numerous agencies serving poor families, including the well-known Harlem Children's Zone in the United States. Dr. William Holzheimer is known across disciplines and internationally for his extensive body of research on quality of care for those living and affected by HIV and AIDS. He's held appointments with the World Health Organization and the International Council of Nurses, His groundbreaking work on symptom management and stigma has influenced health policy internationally, particularly his research on stigma in sub-Saharan Africa. His research contributions span the nursing and interdisciplinary literature with more than 200 research manuscripts. He has a sustained record of public, private, and international funding. Dr. Holzmer has mentored countless students, faculty, and researchers, from novices to senior investigators. Dr. Pamela Jeffries is an international pioneer in simulation research. She developed a testable framework, developed reliable and valid instruments, conducted multi-site studies, and integrated the findings about the effectiveness of simulation into education practice. She's developed and mentored an entire generation of researchers and scholars and has paved the way for the use of simulation around the world. As a result of her research, there's widespread use of simulation in educational practice that has improved the training of health professionals and provided emerging evidence for changes in policies at nursing licensure and accrediting agencies. Her recent work using simulation to prepare nursing students to prioritize and give care to multiple patients is influencing how nurses transition to practice. Dr. Myung Kim's research program examines the effectiveness of self-care strategies for improving health outcomes and overcoming racial, ethnic, and social disparities in healthcare, specifically in the Korean American community. She is dedicated to reducing health disparities experienced by vulnerable, underserved minority populations. Dr. Kim recognizes the importance of community-based participatory research as a tool to address limited health access, to mobilize communities, and to better health outcomes, and to ultimately reduce health gaps in underserved minorities. Through her program of research, she intensely focuses on building community infrastructures through grassroots Korean American organizations. Her excellence in scholarship, practice, and teaching has led to international collaborations, including consulting for the South Korean government. Dr. Ruth Kleinpell's research on acute care nurse practitioners has had a significant influence in advancing this role and in outlining challenges and strategies for further role development. Her research related to outcomes of critical illness for hospitalized elders has informed clinicians about the impact of intensive care unit hospitalization on older adults and the impact of telehealth interventions for elderly patients who are at high risk of rehospitalization. Dr. Kleinpell was selected by the Hartford Institute for Geriatric Nursing and the American Academy of Nursing to lead an expert panel on acute and critical care practice in the United States. This panel developed a web-based course titled Best Practices for Elder Care, which has been completed by more than 4,000 clinicians. Dr. Kleinpell's research and publications have been widely cited and used for the acute care nurse practitioner national scope and standards in the United States. Other countries that have benefited from Dr. Kleinpell's work include Canada, Colombia, Greece, Ireland, New Zealand, Singapore, and South Africa. Dr. Marie Nolan is an international leader in research on patient and family healthcare decision-making at the end of life and in advancing doctoral education globally. With her interdisciplinary research team, she developed one of the few longitudinal studies of the natural history of patient and family decision-making at the end of life. The findings from Dr. Nolan's research have significantly contributed to the literature leading to the current shift away from autonomous end-of-life decision-making toward a shared decision-making model involving the healthcare provider, the patient, and the family. Dr. Nolan has used her extensive research expertise to assist in the development of the core curriculum for certification of nurses by the Hospice and Palliative Care Nurses Association in the United States. Dr. Linda Shields has become a world expert in the field of family-centered care. As a pediatric nurse who lived in developing countries for many years, her doctoral studies examined the way family-centered care is delivered to hospitalized children in developed countries, such as Australia and the United Kingdom, and then also in developing countries, such as Indonesia and Thailand. Her postdoctoral work continued these studies to expand it to Sweden and Iceland. Most importantly, her work on family-centered care is now the basis for practice guidelines in many pediatric hospitals around the world, and her work is being replicated by researchers in several countries. Dr. Carol Smith develops, tests, and translates into practice nursing and interdisciplinary interventions that support patients and family caregivers in managing complex home care. Her research-based interventions have been used in international health policies and adopted in countries around the world by both nurses and social workers. Dr. Smith's infection prevention kit was used in the United States by the State of Kansas Department of Health in its campaign to increase hand washing in schools and restaurants throughout the state. Now translated into 6 languages, this kit has been used by medical teams in remote villages of South America, the Caribbean, and Africa. Dr. Smith's evidence-based peer support interventions are also used by social workers in Ireland, Canada, and Iran. Dr. Xiaohong Wang's research has focused on women's health and long-term care of elderly people. Prior to her appointment as dean, she served as Deputy Minister of Health for Taiwan. Her widespread influence on nursing in Taiwan is a result of her long commitment to mentoring the next generation of nursing educators and scholars. Dr. Wang's research in women's health, specifically related to sexual harassment and immigrant women, has had a profound influence on shaping the care and treatment of women. Her championing on behalf of these women has received support and encouragement from women's civic groups and the government. Dr. Wang's research influenced the establishment of the Taiwan Gender Equity Education Act in 2004 and the Sexual Harassment Prevention Act in 2005. Please join me once again in congratulating all of our honorees. Now, the casual and fun part of this presentation. We're going to proceed with our talk show now. And we're going to ask some questions of these honorees that were submitted by Congress attendees. And you'll get to learn a little bit about each one of them in terms of their background and how they got to where they are at this point in their careers. Now, most of the questions we received focused on the interface between research and practice. So we're going to begin with that theme. And some of the members wanted to know how much time you spent in clinical practice before becoming a nurse researcher, and are any of you still involved in clinical practice? We're going to start with Dr. Allen and just go down the line.
Well, actually, I started my career in clinical practice, but I practiced for 2 short years before I went into nursing education. But I continue to practice in my research as I do effectiveness research and deliver interventions to prevent heart disease. So I consider that clinical practice, and I continue to do that as part of my research.
I started my career in clinical practice, and up until 2003 I was a clinical nurse specialist or clinical nurse consultant in heart failure. Like Dr. Allen, I still continue to have a strong role in practice. I'm very lucky to have a clinically based unit at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney, and also I've had the great privilege to work in a primary care setting, an Aboriginal medical service, which I work with the Aboriginal health workers and physicians there. So I think as a researcher, clinical practice is a key part of your role, and I think it's something that to do meaningful research you never let go of.
I worked as a clinical nurse for approximately 12 years before I moved into nursing education. And part of that time was in acute care services, and the other part of that time was in community nursing. Keeping up my clinical practice is very important to me, and the way in which I do that is that all of my research projects that I undertake are all based in clinical services. So I work in partnership with many clinical areas, and hence that keeps me up to date with the clinical areas. A recent, more important part, over the last 4 years, we've developed our own wound healing service at our university, and that's a part of the wound research team that I oversee. So we actually have now a nursing clinic, so that's been a great way for me to be able to maintain that clinical context as well.
I've been in the practice area for about 17 years, where I also, as an educator, spend 50% of my time in practice, so that was a privilege to have that. I lost a little bit of contact when I was dean, and then now the last few years again, very intensively in community work. And so I spend a lot of time in the community, as you heard that I'm doing HIV stigma reduction, and so I am really in the heart of the community and in the practice area.
I think I'm still doing practice, although I think I define it a little differently. So I think that when, as a nurse, the research that we do, I think we all feel the mandate that it has a direct impact on people's well-being now. So when I talk to a nursing student and talk about the great thing about doing research is that while all nurses want to help people, one of the things that you do as a researcher is you create something that's helping people you've never met before and you never will meet. So I think that the work that I do, because it's affecting people right now, I see myself as still being involved in practice.
One of the beautiful things I think about nursing is that we bring people in different ways. I was actually a tenured associate professor at a major nursing school when I became a nurse. So my career, I went back to nursing after I had a PhD with a commitment to do clinical research. So, and I agree very much with my colleague. My clinical practice has been working with community agencies primarily in helping people live well with HIV and quality of life, symptom management, and medication adherence.
I reflect back, and I had 12 years of clinical practice, if you want to define practice that way, and this was in cardiovascular intensive care nursing. But then, as I do look back, I was always dabbling in the education side, the preceptor programs, and also developed a cardiac rehab to teach people more about, cardiovascular. So that began my practice, and then I came in on the nursing education side. And today, I think that's a practice with the teaching and the education that we deliver.
My answer to this question is very similar to all those previous honorees. My clinical practice, about 12 years before I went to graduate school, if you define practice and research as where does your full-time salary come from, that's where my practice was. But I do think that now that looking back and currently assessing my situation, this practice and research paradigm division is a very artificial one. I do cardiovascular prevention research in community setting. So much of my work is engaging in a community resident to be engaging health promotion behaviors. So every day of my research activity is about clinical practice.
Well, I received my PhD after I had worked 10 years in intensive care, but I continued to practice, and I practiced in the ICU for a total of 22 years, and I currently maintain practice as a nurse practitioner. So I think for my research, active practice has been really a key component in directing me in my research as well. So I have definitely benefited by maintaining that.
My research is in end-of-life decision-making, so I started my nursing career as an oncology nurse and then a neuroscience nurse for about 2 years, became a clinical nurse specialist for about another 2 years, went back and got my doctoral degree, and now continue to do my research, but also serve on the ethics consultation team at Johns Hopkins Hospital. So about 2 weeks for every 6 months, I carry a pager that looks a little like this, and I get consultation requests, lead a team of members, interdisciplinary team, to answer questions from patients or medical team members. So I feel that I've maintained my practice, and my practice informs my research, and my research informs my practice.
Well, I started out in clinical research, clinical work, same as everybody else, and it seems like I did it for about 100 years. But I've recently moved to a new job. I've been in this job 8 weeks, and when I get a little more settled into it, I'm going to continue on the practice that I was doing in my previous job. Every week, one afternoon a week, I spent as a level 1 nurse working in post-operative recovery. So I will do that again once I get settled into this new job and help children and families recover from operations.
Like most of us, I had 13 years in clinical practice in ICUs and began discharging patients from ICUs, recognizing what they needed in their homes. So I've been involved in community research for quite a long time relative to high technology at home. The last clinical practice that I was full-time in was as a nurse practitioner, which is what my master's degree is. And then the last clinical trial I just completed was nurse practitioners led, a multi-dimensional and multi-disciplinary group. And we've improved the care of the patients that come to that clinic.
And for me, I dedicated myself to clinical practice and teaching in the area of community health for decades. I began my nursing career by integrating community health services into research. In those early days, I rarely, if ever, separated my research from community health nursing practice and teaching. Although I'm not currently participating in clinical practice because I serve as a dean, but I'm humbled by my past experiences of serving in a community health nursing practice. Thank you.
Well, now I have a series of questions, and unfortunately we won't have time to hear from all of our honorees, but I'll just select them sort of at random. First, the next question is, what strategies have you used to bridge the gap between your research and the world of clinical nursing practice? And Pam, if you would speak to that. What? Yes, sure. And Ruth, I'm going to ask you to speak to it too, so you can be at the ready. Yeah. What strategies have you used to bridge the gap between your research and the world of clinical nursing practice?
Well, my area of focus of research is in nursing education and clinical simulations and different type of pedagogies, and I'd just say clinical redesign. And to help bridge that gap with today's clinical practice is looking at different research studies to try to find evidence. If you look at what is out there in clinical education, there's sparse evidence. We just continue to do in clinical education what we've always done for decades and decades. Mm-hmm. So an example of that now in the States, it's a National Council State Board of Nursing study looking at clinical simulations and substituting the amount of time in clinical safe environments and simulation labs with real practice time. So to get the evidence and to make a difference, can we still educate and train competent nursing students and deliver different type of graduates than we have now, and looking at different clinical environments. So bridging what we need in education currently for new grads is more research, more evidence, more studies. So that's one way.
Ruth?
Great. Well, my area of research has been intensive care unit as well as hospital-based practice. And I think some strategies to bridge the gap is really to engage the clinical nurses within the hospital setting to really be champions for research. And I have found that beneficial in my current role to really bring the perception that research is doable, and it's it should be part of clinical practice as well. And I think once the nurses are participating in research, they see that as well.
Thank you. Dr. Smith. Tell us, was there a person who inspired you to pursue a career in nursing research?
Certainly was. Jean Johnson. Many of you may have heard of her. She is retired now. But I still use all of her series of studies that have been published in the 70s to identify and follow the rigor that she did. She also was very clear about you can do it and gave that as a role model.
How about you, Dr. Schultz?
For me, there was not
It's fine.
For me, there was not a specific person or situation that inspired me, but a combination of people I have met and my educational experiences. In 1988, my education at University of Cincinnati opened my perspective as a feminist nursing scholar. Specifically, the course Nursing and Feminism confirmed my research interest in women's health. As a woman, I believe I'm better able to understand the health needs of women and promote the health of disadvantaged women. And as a nurse researcher, I aspired myself to be an advocate for women's health during my research career. Thank you.
Thank you. How about you, Dr. Schultz?
Well, one of the people who generated my research, a love of research, is sitting here in this row, and that's Helen Edwards, who back in the 1980s was the first person to introduce me to the world of research. And I thank Helen for that. It's been a terrific journey.
Well, Helen, who inspired you?
Well, I guess it was the, I hate to say this, but I think the probably generation of nurses just ahead of me. I'm thinking back to, and I'm reflecting here in Queensland, where we were starting to prepare for a move to tertiary education for nurses. And this started with what we called the postgraduate courses for the nurses who were already registered, etc. And it happened to be at QIT, who was the forerunner of the university where I now work, who ran these courses. And there were three particular nurse educators who ran and set up those courses. And I did that course for them for the year, and that started me on my whole trajectory of study. But it was in that 12 months that they weren't researchers. They were doing information, but they really didn't have research processes themselves. They were quite new into this area, but they knew, and what I believe they instilled into us as those students at that time was that if we wanted to move the profession to the next level, they had begun to move us up in the education level, and they really got the message through to us that if we wanted to move nursing further and to get the connection between the education and the practice, it was going to come through research. And that was the biggest message that I took away from that year of study and put me on the path of then doing my studies and my research. So it was that generation before us who were real leaders at that time, I believe.
All right. Okay, we're going to stay down on this end. I have to give cues to our camera people so we're not hopping back and forth. But Dr. Allen and Dr. Davidson, would you speak to what advice you would give to novice researchers in terms of what you think are the most important ways they can jumpstart a research career? And one question specifically, people would like advice about what are the best strategies for getting published?
Well, I think for me, and when I was a novice researcher, what was most critical was to find a good mentor, and for it to not just be one person, but multiple mentors across different disciplines. And that really has contributed to my success, and I think is advice that I give to my mentees. I think it's critical to reach across nursing and outside of nursing for mentorship to build our science.
I would agree. I think it's about seeking supportive and enabling environments, and for people who believe in you. Interestingly, I think particularly in nursing, we need to have money to believe in people, and that's why I think Sigma is a fabulous organisation. Because if I reflect back on my career, I you know, after being immersed in children and working night shift, I had my first job as a research nurse. And the cardiologist obviously saw I had potential, and he said, you know, you're going to the American Heart Association meeting. You know, I was in the midst of kids. You know, I was working in a hospital, whereas if you thought you had a cup of tea, that was a blessing. And here's someone saying, I'm going to pay you to go to the States. That was truly a transformative experience for me, because as a form of a mentor, I met Kathy Dracup, and as a story, she was up there young and blonde and elegant, and I'm thinking, I could never, look like that, or, you know, I can't do what she does because I'm a mum and I'm working, etc. Then I finally talked to her, and she told me she had 5 kids, and I thought, oh, nothing to talk about. But my point of that story is you need supportive and enabling environments, but particularly as us generational nurse leaders, we need to be able to financially support people to have opportunities to open their eyes, and that is something that is broadly available. And that's one of the things that I really celebrate Sigma for, is because it does give opportunities. So in summary, supportive and enabling environments, and, you know, seeking mentors that are really going to enable you and open doors for you. And hopefully, generally, if you can get a mentor with money, that's even better.
Dr. Gross, do you have some advice for our novice researchers?
Yes. I think the thing that I have benefited most in my career is really good critique. I tell my students that I know what you really want to do is get published. But I say, no, what you really, really want is a really good critique. Because you can get something published that 10 years later you're going, oh, I can't believe that's in print. I can never take it back. I've learned the most from getting really constructive, thoughtful critique from nurses, as well as from people from other disciplines who help me to understand how the language that I use may not be understood by other disciplines. So having been in an environment where you have the opportunities, or you seek out the opportunities to get critique, is really important.
Very good. A colleague of mine, or a mentor of mine several years ago, said something that I always remember. Feedback is a gift. You know, don't take it in a negative light. You should be thankful when people give you constructive feedback. Yes. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, our organization is committed to becoming intentionally global. So, Dr. Inrhf and Dr. Holzheimer, what can we do to facilitate collaboration among nurse researchers around the globe?
Well, I think it's very important that you identify the group of people, or universities, or people by reading articles and identifying people working in the same field that you are working, and reaching out to those people and see whether you can't get linked up. At conferences also, when you attend and you go to, like here where you are, and you hear what people are presenting and how can you link up with them. And that's how you start building networks all over the world, and linking up to those people. Becoming involved in international team research through organizations is also a possibility.
Dr. Holzman?
I would add, when I think back on my own career, it actually were doctoral students who came to us, who I worked with over the years. They went home, developed their careers. We stayed in touch, supported each other, built collaborative projects over time. So I would look for opportunities to work not only with faculty on collaborative projects, but of course, financing is always a challenge, but it's not expensive to serve on committees at other institutions, for example, as a way to build partnerships. And those become friendships, but they also become collegial research opportunities. And I think both ways, from a student-faculty mentorship, is a really wonderful way to develop global linkages.
Very good. Okay, now we're going to shift down to this side again, starting with Dr. Nolan. Now, we have a unique situation this year in that several of our inductees are from the same university. So I'm going to pose this question to each of our inductees that are from Johns Hopkins. So what is unique about your institution that enables several nurse researchers to achieve high levels of research productivity and impact? And what do you recommend as important attributes of research supportive environments?
I think we do have a unique culture at Johns Hopkins, and it starts with our School of Nursing values. We have a culture of excellence, but I think it's also much more personal than that. In addition to being committed to excellence and advancing nursing science, we actually like each other quite a bit. So I think we have friendships on faculty that are, I think, deeper than collegial relationships that we have with other faculty outside Johns Hopkins. And that comes into play when we critique each other's work. We have an internal review process before any research grant goes out, and that is thanks to the great leadership of Dr. Jerry Allen, who's our Associate Dean for Research. But that process helps us to make sure that we put forth the best possible research when we submit it for grants or either NIH grants within our government or Sigma Theta Tau grants. But I would say it's that cohesiveness, that sense of solidarity that is at Johns Hopkins that helps us.
Dr. Kim?
I also concur with Dr. Morinolan's insightful assessment. I also think that Johns Hopkins is, you're right, it is a competitive place. It is a highly stressed cookers, but like all good Chinese tea, those taste really good when you have more pressure. So we produce great tea or research product under that right pressure. But the more than all kidding aside, I think the real good ingredient of a success of Johns Hopkins researchers are somehow this institution has a long tradition of playing team sports. It is each research projects, it is understood by PI, co-investigators, and other collaborators. This is a genuinely team sport. This is a collaborative project. No more individuals, no more prima donna run games. So I think that's something to contribute to our success.
Very good. Dr. Grove?
I'm smiling because I'm one of the newer members to Hopkins, and I tell people it's a home for neurotic overachievers. You feel, and I think the thing that's so nice about it, I know that sounds odd, but people want to work with you. I mean, you across divisions, there is this sense that if you do good work, we all benefit, which I think is an amazing environment. So that if you come to a place where you really want to do excellent work, it's a good home.
Very good. Dr. Allen?
Well, I would say that we're very fortunate to have a wonderful dean, Dean Martha Hill, who is an outstanding scientist and values research. So I think it starts at the very top, and we tend to attract faculty who value research, who have a strong drive to develop meaningful and good science. And we're also blessed with students at all levels who contribute to our research programs, our pre-doctoral, our postdoctoral, our masters, and also an outstanding group of baccalaureate students who all contribute to our success in terms of research.
All right. Thank you, ladies. We're going to stay down here with Dr. Davidson. Oh. Yes, please. I missed one of our Hopkins people.
You did.
Yes, sorry, Pam. Thank you.
I was formulating my answer.
Please, sure.
Okay. I knew, though. I came 3.5 years ago, and
I'm still thinking of you in Indiana.
Well, but with Hopkins, I came for the possibilities and opportunities and the contributions you feel that you can make there. It's such a wonderful institution. I concur with what all my colleagues said, and it does start with Dean Hill being very supportive. And in fact, what you want to do, it's what does it take to do it? And across all the divisions, it's unbelievable how you can be collegial and collaborative across 9 division schools. You just call a meeting and they're there. So it's pretty phenomenal. But the resources, the support, it's a wonderful place.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Back to Dr. Davidson. Okay, the next question is, what was your most challenging barrier in conducting your research?
Well, I think we live in as a general point, we live in very interesting times for research. I think it's becoming increasingly challenging because of the regulatory and governance procedures associated with every sort of project. So I think I currently have a trial at the moment that I think will kill me, but largely because it's a trial of oxygen versus air, which is theoretically a drug, so we had to have the concentrators blinded in the US, get through all the regulatory factors, and also the increasing pressures for multi-site research increases the complexity. So I think we work in a very challenging environment, which I think really underscores some of the unique skills that we need to provide to researchers in PhD programs. I think the governance, regulatory factors are really, challenging, and it's again something that you might not necessarily learn in your doctoral program. Yes, you could do a regression analysis, but can you go and broker a deal with a company to get a device at a point? So it's interesting, some of the newer programs are actually looking at MBA, PhD programs, which I think in terms of leadership is an interesting development. So unfortunately, I have many challenges, not just one, but I think as a rule, and I think many of my colleagues here would agree that it's increasingly complex and difficult to do clinical research.
Dr. Edwards?
I would agree with what Tricia said. I think the other part is, I want to say financial or getting funding, but not in the sense of we all know how competitive it is to get funding. But I think it's about all of us being able to educate funding bodies and other people who work with about the cost of doing nursing research. There seems to be no question when we come to do research with our science colleagues that how much it costs to have work done and looked after in a laboratory. Everybody understands you have laboratory costs and you have to maintain your data banks, etc. When it comes to doing work with nursing research, there seems to be this perception, well, there's nurses out there and they can just collect the data for you. And I don't think there's an appreciation of how complex that is, and we have to pay for that time. This is not in their everyday work that they do. And so I think something we have to, part of our role as leaders in this area is about educating people about that. We don't need to complain and moan about the cost of research, but I think that's a real thing I think that is underestimated. And when we do put collaborative grants in, I think people think that the nursing side might be cost less than the other sides, and that's not the case. And I think we need to make sure that we are making sure that people understand the value that we have, which we certainly have, and how much that value comes at a cost.
Dr. Garif?
I want to agree with the funding in general, but I want to move over to being in an environment opposite to what Johns Hopkins have said, and where you have to now start research and you have to lead people and you have to really start creating that environment. That was a big challenge for me when I started as dean in a school where there wasn't that, and to start that. So that was a big challenge. And then the nature of the kind of research I'm doing, where stigma is so high, and you do work on stigma, is a constant challenge.
Absolutely. How about you, Dr. Gross?
Cash. It's I think that I think nurse researchers have really grown to a level of understanding that in order to do good work, it's expensive. Clinical trials, getting the quality, the monitors, the fidelity monitoring in place, and having the sample size. And because nurses do research that has a direct impact on people's health, there's nothing esoteric about it. It really is more expensive and more complicated to do research in the community or to do research within organizations like hospitals. So I think that that's an important challenge.
Dr. Holzmer?
We talk a lot about building a program of research over time, and I think we heard some fabulous examples here of folks who've done that. One of the biggest challenges for those of us who work in HIV has been the changing nature of the epidemic itself, particularly around medications, where in the beginning people were waking up every 3 hours, you know, with handfuls of medications. Symptoms were huge issues. Symptoms have almost gone away. Although ironically, these folks very often have so many other comorbidities, the symptom profile is similar, but it's because of different things. And so moving over this 30-year period from no treatment, where we were basically doing end-of-life quality of care, hospice care, to now integrating with hepatitis C and other comorbidities, it's been a big challenge to develop a program of research that we talk about in our group as living well with HIV. And it's just changed so dramatically over these years, and how we have had to respond and change our protocols, change our focus, change our funding sources, etc. So the technology, and it's mostly the pharmacology for us.
Dr. Jeffries, how about in simulation?
Wow. Well, I think the overall barrier has been having a program of research in the science of nursing education, because many times, in fact, my dissertation, I was not on the nursing education side. I did health promotion, health behavior research. But my passion was always on the education side, and truthfully, people always tried to talk me out of going on that side. But that's where my passion, compassion was. To this day, I think it's still a barrier when one studies the science of nursing education and looking at the technologies, the pedagogy, whatever that is. But it still is greatly needed, because we have to prepare nurses using best practices and quality and all that. I think today is a new day, though. It's getting better. In the United States, we have the Future of Nursing Education reports that come out, the Institute of Medicine. Education's more on the forefront. We have to do a better job. We're being more accountable, reliable in higher education institutions. So it is a new day. I think it's being more valued than it ever was. And if you look at funding sources, there are more coming out at the federal, national level, because we do need to study those technologies, the informatics, the pedagogies, and all around. It is about patient care, improving patient care with the quality of care that nurses are providing. So it does connect to patient care, even though it's on the education side.
Very good. Okay, we're going to pose that same question down on this end for our support staff. Dr. Kim?
I have very similar concern about this funding shortage for nursing research, particularly for the translational research. We are just right staged to really disseminating just one more step. We're so close to provide a great answer for community residents or underserved population. But moreover, this whole economic meltdown of global economic crisis really wakes me at night about my research, and not just because of it's going to be a great funding shortage, but also it will be certain perspective shift. Health disparity research in general, globally, I mean, we nursing researchers been pretty forefront of it. We made a great stride for the last 10, 20 years. But now we're becoming to, in this era of resources scarce, and the first thing that people will be, policymakers, or even us, reviewers, we're thinking about that, okay, where we should put our resource allocation, where the most bang for the buck. And I'm afraid that if we're going back to that sort of a mental scheme and that logic, we will lose a lot of the achievement we made it by putting really focus systematically, methodologically improve strategy to improve minority health. People who are probably non-substantial minority, but this is when we were putting those resources to the majority of population. That's the reason why we have health disparity in this world. And if we are going back to, okay, where the most, the bang for the buck, that approach, and I'm afraid that a lot of our gain will be, evaporated in a few decades. And that worries me a little bit. I think I don't have a solution, but I'm looking for answers from our audiences.
What are your challenges, Dr. Kleinfeld?
Well, I think definitely with clinical research, it's trying to address the barriers to conducting research. Especially in the hospital setting, patient care takes priority, and so research is sort of a secondary component. So I think with our clinical nurses, we really try and reinforce the benefit and show them the impact of what they're doing in research benefits them for patient care as well. So I think that engaging them is helpful too. And I think in the United States, we have seen such initiatives as magnet designation, helping to promote clinical research, and certainly organizations like Sigma Theta Tau International that really help to promote research as well.
Thanks. Dr. Nolan?
I think one of the challenges I deal with now, I've been a new position as department chair, and so I have to consider not only my program of research, but the program of research of many young scholars who are in my department. So I think helping people, helping myself think this way, but also helping young scholars think about what are the actions that will create most impact from their work. So thinking about, of course, being a good citizen and helping others in the school, because that's the culture we want to create, one of cohesiveness, but also thinking about what is the problem that they most want to impact with their research, and what is the interventions that they can do, what is the research that they can conduct that would be most likely to lead to the greatest impact.
Dr. Shields, what have your challenges been?
I have two answers to this, and both of them are very contentious and hopefully will make you feel uncomfortable. My first barrier that I'd like to talk about has been, now I have worked in several different countries, and this is not a problem that is unique to Australia. I have an honorary position in a medical school, and I've done a lot of work in a medical school, and I have had, in some places, in some areas, much more support from my medical colleagues than from my nursing colleagues. And that has been very difficult to deal with. And it's something that I think as a profession we have to think about. My other contentious question lies around ethics committees. Now, I do some research into the role of nurses in the Nazi era. And I know what happened. I study what happened in places like Ravensbrück concentration camp, and I know why the Nuremberg Code and all these ethics committees are so important. But I believe that these days it has become, ethics committees have taken on a life of their own, so that in some cases they are not just there to review research, they are there to be ethics committees. And that puts up barriers that need not be put in place and makes life for researchers very difficult, and makes life for the patients for whom we're doing the research very difficult, because it extends the research period just so much. And that's something, that's another problem I think we need to think about.
How about in your work, Dr. Smith?
Well, I would say all of these problems, including the nightmares, are things that I have experienced, but I can see from all of the people sitting up here that we can get over those and we can continue our research. So I'll take a little different tact. Having completed several clinical trials, the issue I find myself with now is people wanting to use the research, which I'm very happy about. However, I found very quickly that they use the research not in the way it was protocoled or developed. They get different findings. This happened to me once, and of course indicated that this research was not accurate and shouldn't be used. So we had some interactions over that, and I learned that I need to have a set of protocols to release the interventions that we have developed, asking people, yes, I want these out in the world, I want nurses using them, and they really benefit patients, but you must do it according to this protocol. That's the biggest challenge I have at the moment.
Dr. Wang?
I think we all share the same challenge during our research career. And we all know no money, no research. It's the very most challenge. But in addition to finding research funding, I think the most challenge barrier is getting IRB approval before conducting research. To protect the rights of human rights, it is necessary to apply for IRB approval. However, the IRB application process could take weeks, sometimes even months, which could affect the research progress. And different institutions usually have different IRB regulations and requirements. This might make subject recruitment difficult and prolong the research process. That's why I'm facing the challenge right now.
Thank you. Okay, now our last question, we're going to end on a lighter note, if you will. And I've asked the researchers to think about what's something funny that has happened to you in your research experience, or perhaps just something very interesting. Dr. Wang?
Me? First. In 1995, I published a research report on sexual harassment in medical practice. The research drew a lot of discussions and argument from medical field. At that time, Taiwan government was just beginning to discuss the implementation of regulation related to sexual harassment. Therefore, I was able to piggyback on the initiative and had the opportunities to talk about and explain my research to the members of the Taiwan Medical Association and Taiwan Preventive Medical Association. And sexual harassment was a very sensitive topic, as you know. I somehow was able to speak publicly about the issue. And there may be many challenges during our research career. We should find the strength and courage to face those challenges and enjoy our research if we wish to contribute to and make an impact on our society and the policy-making process.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
Well, I'll tell a funny story I have experienced a couple of times. We're a long rural state. We have the majority of the population on one end, and we're very fortunate to serve the people at great distances. So we have used a lot of telehealth and a lot of internet kinds of interactions and research protocols. In one of them, one of the nurses sat in front of her telehealth, and she felt like her hair was messed up, that she'd been out in her garden, and so she apologized to the patient, who can see her, of course. "I'm sorry I didn't comb my hair today." The patient replied, "Don't worry about it, I haven't put my pants on yet." Okay. So be careful with telehealth research.
I was doing a large research project with a particular socio-economically disadvantaged group here in Australia, and I had these 13 grandmothers within this community who are my index people for the study. And I got to know them very well, and they were wonderful to me, but I was sitting having a cup of tea one day with one of the grannies in her kitchen, and she was minding her little 3-year-old granddaughter. And Granny's sitting there smoking away. And the little 3-year-old's pulling Granny's skirt, wanting her attention, and Granny's trying to talk to me. So Granny's going like this, and she reached down and gave the cigarette to the 3-year-old, who ran off smoking it. And I'm sitting there thinking, don't look shocked, don't look surprised, mind your expression, it's not your place to say anything. So I finished my interview, I was very calm, cool and collected, and ran back as fast as I could to the maternal and child health clinic to tell the child health nurse so that she could go and do something with that family.
Well, being an end-of-life researcher, it's really hard to think of any hilarious stories. So I will tell you something from my dissertation research when I was interviewing elderly people in nursing homes, and I had a very good friend who was a psychiatric nurse, and she said, "Marie, you must always remember that in the nursing home, the patient's room is their home. So you must never do anything without asking permission. So when you come into the room, say, may I sit here, please? If you do anything at all, you always ask. So I went into a patient's room, and it was a very poor nursing home, very lower income neighborhood. So I asked if I could sit down. The woman said yes. And then I noticed a large bug going across the floor. And I said, may I please kill your bug? She said, yes, please do.
Very good. Dr. Kleinfeld? Well, I had an experience with one of our studies. It dealt with equipment in the patient's home, and it turned out that this was the first patient I was enrolling this equipment in, and it turned out he was a physician, and I really didn't know that until I got there. So I went through the whole explanation of what I needed to do, and I tried to get the machine to work, and whatever I did, it wasn't working. So he finally said to me, he said, you know what? He said, it's the outlet. It hasn't worked in years. I had no idea that the outlet I was trying to plug in didn't work. So,
this is actually happening in my house. I'm raising a bicultural monsters because I was born and raised in Korea, and I raising these two incredibly hilarious bicultural monsters at home. But anyway, when I was just trying to establish my research career, I always have to go to different churches. So they always worry about, me not, well, they always make it, just fun about me not being in home all the time. So one Sunday I come home a little bit earlier than I used to, and they said, one of my boys just come out and say, hi, my name is Don Kim. Do you remember me? So I said, and this is the kid that I really trying hard to bring to the nursing school, but he didn't. But he went to college, and the first semester of his college, he was signed up for Asian American Study. And he sent me an email and said, hey, Mom, I found it. Somebody who's expert in Korean American mental health, you should read her article. So he sent me this little video about the title, and I realized that was my article. So I said, that wonderful, fabulous researcher happened to be your mom. And he was like, really? So he doesn't give me any more hard time. Yeah.
I'm reflecting back on a study. It was an instructional classroom study on how to perform a 12-lead ECG. And one method was actually through simulation, mannequin, and just like we typically do, put electrodes on a flat mannequin and all that. And the second method was using technology on a CD-ROM at that time and comparing the two instructional methods. And I had to travel. They did the instruction, then they had to perform this 12-lead ECG on a standardized patient. So I had to hire a simulated standardized patient. And he had to have 35 12-lead ECGs done that day. And when he took off his shirt, he had a chest full of hair.
Oh, no.
And he did that 35 times. So next time I learned a lesson: when you hire standardized patients, you be specific about the criteria, because he did not have such a good day.
Wow. Bill?
Well, I can think of lots of blunders and faux pas and mistakes we made. Many of them turned out humorous, but I guess my comment, and think it's not particularly a funny joke, I just want to say how surprised I've been over my career, the friends and the friendships that have developed globally.
Well, I think we can all be grateful for that. Thank you.
I struggled with this one because finding something humorous, it seems always humorous to me that I actually get through these projects. So in the study that we did a few years ago, it was to create this parenting program, and what we wanted to do that was unusual is we wanted to video real parents and children doing things well, and parents doing things well, not so well, as a way to teach. And then you show these vignettes in the parent group. parents learn much better from critiquing other people than critiquing themselves. And so we auditioned families from the south side and the west side of Chicago. And there was like a line around the block. People were just so excited to be videoed, have it, and show their dirty laundry to the world. So we picked 13 families, and one of them was a family that we wanted them to, in some of these situations, we contrived so that we could get some important principles. So we were trying to teach a principle called mixing praise with criticism. And we asked the father and the mother to each take a turn, giving praise followed by a criticism. And the father said, dinner was really good, but I hate legs. I only like breasts, and you know that I only like. And it was great, except he never said the word chicken, so we couldn't use the whole thing. So that was a lost opportunity.
Well, linking with what Bill has said, and I'll tell the joke, in using that, when you do international research and you're all over the world, and we were meeting all over, and we were meeting in Malawi, and now we were going to go and snorkeling as part of seeing this. So the hippopotamus, all there, crocodiles, and I'm saying, where are they? No, where we're going, it's quite far. So in we go and we snorkel. And as we come back, it's very close to the side, and we're going now into this river mouth where the crocodiles are. And as we go into the river, we hit a river bank. Bill and everybody is sitting in the front. I'm sitting at the back. So he asked me kindly to get out of the boat and help us to push the boat off the bank. Well, it was literally like pushing and trying to jump in, because here are the crocodiles who just told us. So that's the joy of also with international research and going along and having all these things. And as Bill and I said, we quite often danced where we were. We always had a party. So that's the nice parts.
Good to have a little team-building recreation on the side.
Exactly, yes.
Ellen?
Okay. I guess my story was to me at the time was quite humorous when it occurred, but it did cause for some reflection on the work that I was involved in. The context of this was the early 90s here in Queensland, and we were doing observational studies in nursing homes where we would randomly pick times and go in and sit as unobtrusively as we could in the corners of corrals or bays, and we were noting who spoke to who and how long interactions went. It was quite an interactional study. And we'd been doing this for quite a while. And I say this is in the early 90s here because aged care has come a long way. So this is quite contextual, I hope. So this day they were random times we were to pick, and I was given, I think it was 5 till 7 on a Friday night. So Julie go to the residential facility and randomly picked the bay I'm to sit in, and then we randomly picked residents. So the staff never knew who we were watching or what they knew what we were doing in essence, but not specifically. So I'm just noting things and coding my things. And in the next bay, which was not one of the areas that I was coding at that time, the registered nurse on. Now this is 5 till 7. It was a fairly high-level unit with a lot of people with dementia, and over the dinner time, not many staff on. So the area was quite busy actually in this facility, and there were lots of things going on. But this nurse, Julie, comes out, the registered nurse, and I thought it was another medication round. And then I realised it was the alcohol round, because this was, as I'm saying, in the context of when it was deemed to be okay for some older people in a nursing home to have a drink in the evening if they wanted to, and if their families agreed to it. So out came the medicine trolley, and there was obviously a list, like a medication list. And I thought, I understand the context because we were in, as I say, a period of change. So some of the residents get their drink, and she finally gets to the person who I'll call Charlie, and she says, well, Charlie, I've got your drink of whiskey here for you tonight. And she pours it out, and Charlie does not want to have his drink of whiskey tonight. And he's quite belligerent about it, and she just could not get him to take his drink of whiskey. And she was getting very frustrated. And the part that she just put it down, hit it on the top of her trolley and said, I wish I could drink this whiskey. I think I need the whiskey. And I just had to write it on my field notes. And to this day, I still want to write an article that says, who should have the whiskey? Dr. Davidson?
Well, I guess, like Dr. Holzmer, I can't think of any sentinel event, but I have had lots of fun. But as a humorous story, because I can laugh about it now, actually just happened on Saturday night where I had some of my global friends for dinner at my house, and my adult children are talking to them, and then I come into part of this conversation. So they've probably asked my children to reflect on their life with their crazy mum, and I think to talk about it here is probably important because many of us do these juggles, and so I would have these long commutes with my kids, an hour, and I'd try and make all my phone calls on the way. And so one of my kids said to my colleague, said, well, look, you know, we kind of got to feel if we really had to sort something out with Mum, we had to schedule a teleconference. So I don't know if that's humorous. It's humorous now because they're adults and they've turned out okay. But I guess the reason for telling that story is, apart from the humour, it just really reflects many of the juggles that we have to make, particularly to maintain this clinical research, professional community life and families. It's a challenge for all of us, I think.
Dr. Allen?
Well, I've had, I think, like the other folks, have had several very humorous experiences in terms of data collection. But I think what I'd like to sort of mention here is to remember to have fun in doing your research. Make your research fun. We all know how intensive and how much hard work it is to conduct research. But we also need to remember to make it fun, and to make it fun for the people that are helping us with our research. It really is a very rewarding process, and to make it even more rewarding, it needs to be fun.
Well, I think that's the perfect note to segue. I think that ends us on a very positive note. I hope you've enjoyed these insights and anecdotes as much as I have. And please join me once again in congratulating our inductees. You may take your seats. So I hope you found the conversation as insightful as I did. And I want to once again thank Wiley-Blackwell for sponsoring this wonderful program. And very excited again to announce that they have agreed to sponsor us again next year. So we really appreciate their continued support. As we look to the 24th International Nursing Research Congress, which, as you've heard, will be in Prague in the Czech Republic in 2013, we have a brief presentation, a video presentation, I believe, highlighting the program.